Alright y'all, so in this video I'm going to be showing you how to set up a rigid heddle loom for 3 shaft weaving, and I will be using 3 heddles that are the same dent. In upcoming videos I'll be showing you how to do this with heddles that are different dents, but we're going to start out easy for this one and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to be using, in this video, I'm demonstrating using a Cricut loom. I kind of like starting on the Cricut loom because this is the one that can sometimes be the underdog in the loom world, and they're like, no, you can't do these things on the Cricut loom. So I like to start there and prove it wrong. What you see me doing is I'm measuring the width in the heddle of how wide I want my piece of cloth. And so I marked the first heddle, and now I'm just going back and I'm marking the second heddle and the third heddle, so that they're all in the same place. Because I'm using heddles of the same dent, this is an 8 dent reed, it is going to be marked in the same place on all 3 heddles. In future videos or in videos that will be coming up, I'll be using heddles that are of different densities, and when I do that, I'm going to have to do a little bit more calculations, but we'll cross that bridge when we get it. But for the moment, if you have 3 of the same dent heddles, then this is what you're going to do. I will say that it's easier when you're starting out. It's less confusing if you use 3 heddles of the same dent, but I'm going to give you options because I know that that gives people more options, and it just it helps more people to be able to get the most out of this course. So now that everything has been marked, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use some spring clamps to um, hold the heddles in place. I had a little bit of a bow on my table, so I had to move it around. But I'm just going to use the spring clamps. I'm putting 1 clamp on either side of the heddle, and this just holds the heddle up into the position. Now, y'all remember from Module 1 when I was showing you alternate methods. Okay, really quick, I'm telling you that the first heddle is the shaft 1, the second heddle is shaft 3, and the third heddle is the second shaft in the space is going to go through. All right, so we're doing the direct warp, and I'm pulling it through the first slot on the heddle 1, and I'm pulling it through the first hole, and I'm pulling it through the slots that are to the left of the hole on the other 2 heddles. Let's do this again. That was to thread shaft 1. And I'm going to thread shaft 2. So I'm going to pull it through the slot that's beside that hole on the first heddle, the slot that's beside the hole on the second heddle, and I'm going to pull it through the hole of the third heddle. That is to thread shaft 2. Now I'm going to do shaft 3. I'm pulling it through the slot. I'm pulling it through the hole in the second heddle, and I'm pulling it through the slot in the third. Now, I want you to refer in shaft 4, I'm going to be pulling it through just the slots all the way through. We're going to go just straight through the slots all the way through. Now, I refer you, we're doing 1 again. I refer you to the book to see exactly where the threads are going to be passing. It's very clear in the book. It's not as easy to see in the video, but I just want you to see the process by which I'm doing this so that it makes the book make sense. The reason why we do this all at one time as opposed to trying to do one heddle then the other heddle then the other is that it just makes seeing your mistakes a whole lot easier. um, I will make some mistakes in my threading, probably in this video as well as in other ones, and I have to go back and fix it. You can see that you've made mistakes because you can look and you can say, okay, this is going through, shed 1, shed 2. You can count it and whatever just to make sure that you got everybody where they're supposed to be. That's the fourth. I'm showing you that the fourth shaft are the threads that are not are going to be moving freely in the slots when you pick up the sheds. So doing number one again. So when you do number one, and you're always going to be moving over, right? You're going to refer to the books because sometimes you'll have threads for two of the same shaft in one slot, but you're not going to have, in this threading, you're not going to have, three threads going through a slot. And once you have done this a little while, you're going to be able to see the pattern that develops between the sheds, like what belongs in the slot, what's going to be in a hole, how many slots and how many holes are going to be spaced between um, the on the heddle as you're going. I would recommend that you start off doing straight draw threading, right? So you want to get comfortable just going one, two, three slot, or heddle one, heddle three, heddle two, all the slots, heddle one, heddle two, heddle three, all the slots. Because once you've gotten that, then it'll make a whole lot more sense. All right, so you're going to be doing it in repetition, and after a while it will you'll know exactly which way you're going to go, and you'll be able to feel it if you've made a mistake. um, you're going to want to space your heddles as you're doing it in a way that makes it easier for you to get through. This is why I am I have them, I'm using clamps as opposed to trying to fight with this on the loom itself, I mean, yeah, I'm sure if you have enough space in your loom, you could do this directly on your loom. But I say why. Here's a thought. If you're going to be doing if you have a table that's long enough and you don't want to have to tie onto the back, you could always put your loom directly behind. Um, so to my right, I could have had the loom, and you could be putting the threads. Actually, no, it wouldn't work. Would it work? Maybe. Yeah, it would work. It would work if you flipped, well, with a Cricut, I guess you don't really have to flip it around. There's no real front or back to it. Now you see I made a mistake, so I realized it, so I had to go back and go back a little bit. But yeah, if you had a Cricut loom or a loom that so you could be going around the back beam, you would just put the loom to your left, and then you would be pulling the threads around the apron rod, up and over, or whatever around the apron rod. You would put the heddles in front of the loom. All right, I'm giving you a little bit close up, so hopefully you can see this a little bit better. You would put the heddles in front of the loom, your warping peg to the far end, or your warping board, whatever you're using, and then you could do exactly what I'm doing and wind on to the back, because as you'll see, I'm going to need to tie on to the back because of I'm warping this between two warping pegs. But if I were to have put it between the loom and a warping peg, then I wouldn't have to tie on the back. So I'm actually talking this through as I'm thinking about it and figuring out how I can do it as I'm talking to you. So I will have to do a video to show you how this is done, so that you'll understand what I'm saying in case it doesn't make sense. But as you can see, okay, so this is shaft 2 going through the hole. All right, next up is shaft 3 going through the slot and going through the hole. I'm sorry, going through the hole on heddle 2 and the slot on heddle 3. It can get confusing in saying it, but you'll see. And this is shaft 4. It's going through all the slots. What I want you to draw from the video, I'm changing colors. What I want you to draw from the video is basically that you're how you're doing this, right? We're not doing this one heddle, then the next heddle, then the next heddle. We're not trying to warp all the front things and then do the second heddle and do the third things. I don't know if you can, just by looking at it, that could become a rat's nest. I'm all about simplicity. I'm all about I'm trying to find the most straightforward way of doing something. And when I looked in, I think it's the inventive weaving on Little Loom's book, which is an amazing resource. But when I tried the first time to learn how to do the multi-shaft weaving with, with a rigid heddle, and I tried to follow the directions, which you're doing one heddle and then you're taking the threads from the other heddle to do it. I think it's amazing that she figured it out, but I prefer this method because it's more straightforward. Now I'm using doubled threads so that I don't have to worry about moving threads around. If you are a floor loom weaver, or if you're comfortable using an indirect warp, then by all means wind yourself a warp, and then hold your warp chain in your hand, and you can do it, just slay it just as I was doing it, only with an indirect warp. The reason why I am using the doubled threads is that it's a little bit more simple to pull a doubled thread through single holes and slots than to try to do that with a single thread and figure out how to move it around. So next up we have the loom, and I'm going to, once I put the little Heddle rod on here, I'm going to be bringing the warp to the loom. Now, as I just said, I realized that you could put the warp, if you have enough space, you could put the warp, um, you could put the warp and the heddles and everything like that just in front of the loom, as opposed to putting it on the loom, because as you'll see, there's not a ton of space here to hold up the heddles, and see, that wouldn't work, right? Like trying to warp the thing with those heddles where they're sitting right now is just lunacy. Um, so you need to move them in front of the loom, but if you didn't want to have to do all this tying on that I'm about to do, which isn't that, arduous or onerous, it's what it is. It's not that big a deal. You're just going to do it. So I'm securing the front of the warp to the front beam, just so that I have something to pull against as I'm putting the warp on the back beam, right? So now I am, I'm going to tie the warp to the back apron rod. Because I've done such a very short warp, I didn't want to be warping forever, and I wanted to actually be able to make a sample without without risking having a bunch of undone warp for something that I may or may not do anything with when I'm done with this. I decided to just tie on, because there's less loom waste when you do the lashing on as opposed to when you do the surgeon's knot. So when I say tie, I'm going to tie little bundles, and I'm going to lash this onto the back beam. You could totally do surgeon's knots if that's your preferred way of joining, attaching your warp to the back beam. You just want to do whatever is comfortable for you. Like I said, I'm most comfortable lashing on, and so that's what I'm going to do. I've covered lashing on in earlier modules, so I'm not going to really go through what I'm doing here, aside from just explaining what I'm trying to do as it comes to working with these three heddles. So one of the things I'm going to try to I'm going to be just attaching it to this back beam by lashing on, and you're wanting to make sure that you have a good tension. You want to make sure that you leave those clamps on. You don't want to put the clamps you don't want to take the clamps off until you've gotten this whole part of dressing the loom done, right? You want them to be held so that they're held at a relatively um, even level. You don't want there to be any heddles that are coming down lower, or like they're super offset, because that's going to mess up your tension. So you're going to leave your little spring clamps attached to the heddles until you've completely finished dressing the loom and winding onto the back beam, because you don't want to have too much of a difference in the amount of difference between the heddles. So now I've gotten it all tied on. I'm just going to use, some paper to be able to wind onto the back beam. And I am going to be, I'm a big believer in, using a good deal of paper. And so I'm using some double sheets of paper, putting it back there. I know you can't see it. It's a little bit out of frame, but if you're a Cricut user, you know how to put paper on your back beam. That's pretty much what I'm doing. If you're using a different loom, it doesn't matter. The process is the same. You're just going to be putting the paper on to between your levels and your layers. So, and you're going to just be winding on and pulling it through, adding your paper as you go, trying to make sure you keep everybody relatively even. Nobody's too much lower than the other. So because I did a relatively short warp, it didn't take that long to get this on there. I wanted to be able to do this in such a way that you'd be able to see the whole process and I didn't have to cut anything. I sped the video up, but I didn't cut anything. So this is going about twice as fast as normal. I do not move this quickly. I do move quickly, but not this quickly. So, all right, so now I'm going to lash onto the front beam. Like I said, because this is such a short warp, I want to conserve as much of the warp as I can. So I tend to use lashing on when I'm trying to when I don't want a lot of waste, right? If I'm doing something that has tassels or fringe or whatnot, and I can use some of the loom, waste in the project itself, then I'm good to tie on. I actually find that I get better tension personally when I am lashing on than when I tie on. I kind of get a little bit obsessive about making sure that all the bundles are right. And I've been known to sit at the loom for an inordinate amount of time padding the bundles and trying to make sure that everybody is the same tension. I shouldn't even admit that, but it's the truth. But so anyway, I don't do that as much when I'm lashing on as opposed to when I try to tie the knots, tie little surgeon's knots and whatever. So here I go. I'm going to lash this on to the front. And yeah, we're just going to pretty much do the same thing that we did in the back, in the front. What I do try to do is I try to get a relatively even amount of threads, kind of going, trying to grab, about the same on the top as the bottom. I'm not sure if it really makes that much of a difference. I figure it can't hurt, so that's why I do it. Um, so there's I'm just trying to make sure I have a relatively even amount of threads, you know, when I split the bundle to put the little bit of lacing through. The on the Cricut, because of how the bottom shaft is made, the heddles have a tendency, or at least that back heddle, the one that represents shaft two, and the heddle that is the third heddle to the back, the one that's furthest back, it likes to slip under the down shed. So you have to kind of pull it out sometimes. So just FYI if you have a Cricut. Now, that's bugging me because I'm thinking that it's slightly off. It's a little bit off, and so I'm going back to readjust my thing. This is I hadn't used this loom before. I actually had gotten my husband to put it together for me because my other looms were tied up with some other projects, so he had just put it together for me. So I was grateful that it was, but the little lashing things weren't perfectly aligned. But aside from that, shoot, I think he did a great job considering he was working from a picture. Um, I misplaced the directions. So anyway, all right, so now that that's all done, you're going to take off your spring clamps and voila, there you go. There you go. You are cooking with butter because your loom is all dressed and beautiful and ready to go. And one last thing, now that your loom is dressed, the next thing that you're going to do is put in the pickup stick. All of them are in the down shed, and the pickup stick goes under the threads that are raised. You're done.